Alright, so now that we're right on the cusp of Halloween, I figured, because we got another video coming right after this that's going to be bigger, but probably an appropriate time to talk about this, wouldn't you say, since both of these started as midnight movies on Halloween. Shock Treatment especially, like specifically, that was the whole point, was that it was just like midnight screenings on Halloween, which probably didn't do much for its reputation, which was minimal for quite some time.
A lot of people didn't even know it existed until
Yeah.
it came out on like VHS.
Yeah, and like the Rocky Horror fans that had seen it at the time, I remember apparently it had some fans immediately, but the stories I had always heard when we got into the Rocky Horror thing was that Shock Treatment was terrible. It was like a bastard child of sorts. Because we got into Rocky Horror in 2000 when it was the 25th anniversary, and it was a whole big thing. I want to say that was around the time Rocky Horror officially went mainstream. And that's the crazy thing about Shock Treatment is that one of the things that I've always said, usually when I'm talking about stuff like the Sharknado movies, was that the reason the Sharknado movies suck is that you can't force a cult movie. You can't make something specifically for to do that. Because the cult movies happen by accident. That's what makes them what they are. But if there was one person in the entire world that could make a cult movie intentionally, it was going to be Richard O'Brien. Because obviously when you, I don't know about you, but when I think, we may have mentioned this when you brought it up when we did our top 15 favorite movies thing, because it was on your list. And I think we talked about the fact that it was like, when you think the term cult movie, the first thing you'll probably think of is Rocky Horror. And so
I would say Rocky Horror. I would say for a time that was Big Lebowski, but I feel like Big Lebowski has come more into the mainstream.
yeah, and that's the
Which
amazing.
is good for Big Lebowski.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing about Shock Treatment is not only did Richard O'Brien successfully intentionally make a cult movie, but it has now shifted to where these aren't two cult movies. Rocky Horror has graduated to mainstream, and Shock Treatment is now the cult movie of this whole area that was set off by Rocky Horror. And the fact that that happened at all is pretty insane. And like the odds are so low that could happen.
Do you think that Rocky Horror came out of cult status because the world is moving towards a more progressive state of mind? Do you think if we were still in the ultra-conservative ages that it would have stayed a cult status movie?
Yeah, because you get the sense that a lot of that comes where you hear a lot about, like, even though technically, like, I don't know how you want to, I don't know how sensitive the terminology is on this, but I mean, technically Frankenfurter is the villain of the movie. And he is an insane mad scientist that kills and cannibalizes people. he is the villain of the movie, basically. But he is also like such a symbol for people. Like the whole "Don't Dream It, Be It" thing is like a very positive outlook that people have taken, and it's able to make them become the people that they want to be, that dress how they want to dress, and all that. Despite that, and what's really funny about that is I noticed this. It's weird. We've watched this movie probably constantly since that era in 2000. To the point that this is one of the few musicals where I think I know the words to almost every song. And it's one of those things where I don't even remember how that happened. It's just one of those movies that you just get engrossed in completely. Like, it's one of those movies where whenever I rewatch it, when I haven't watched it in a while, I usually end up watching it like at least 2 more times in that vicinity of time, like close together. And I still like find something, like, I think because we know the dialogue so well, there's been some things that have just been kind of going by, like, because we've been watching it like since a young age. But then, like, when you actually stop and think about them, you realize lines having more depth that initially just kind of went by. And it's the fact that, despite the fact that Frank is the villain of the movie, and that stuff we talked about, when Riff Raff basically takes over at the end, it's like oppressive language. Like when he says, your lifestyle's too extreme is one of the reasons he needs to go down. And then when, of course they're talking about the brutal murder of Eddie,
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about the context of just Frank's lifestyle, as they call it, when Dr. Scott agrees that Frankenfurter should be killed, he says society must be protected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's the kind of thing you would hear people that are oppressive would say about
Mm-hmm.
people like Frank and who he
Yeah.
represents. And so that whole thing is I feel like that's like everywhere in the movie, and I just still haven't seen all of it yet.
Mm.
But do you remember some of the things you said in the previous video we did about it being one of your top 15 movies?
We did that so long ago.
Yeah, it was like over 2 years ago.
By the end of that video, it felt like it had been a while since I talked about it. It was a long one.
Because, what were we going to say?
Go ahead.
There's a lot of things going on in it that seem like they wouldn't match up.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ode to 50s sci-fi movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously about these characters, and like I said, who they represent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a musical. And
I
it's like
I think it was made at the perfect time for it. Because if it was made before it was made, I don't think it would have caught on. I don't think society would have been ready for it. And I think if they tried to make it now, a lot of people would accuse it of being extreme for the sake of being extreme.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of people that seem to not be able to catch on the, I don't know if it's so much satire as much as it is parody of, like, the 50s sci-fi movies that you hear about in the title,
Mm-hmm.
or in the opening song.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, there's a lot of overacting,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think, because there was a lot of people that watched it. Like, I remember Siskel and Ebert weren't very kind to it, and they said they didn't understand how it was supposed to be a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, first and foremost, it's a parody of those sci-fi movies. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the overacting comes in. Like those, especially Brad's deliveries, and the
Mm-hmm.
way everything Sarandon says, it's like so over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's clear they're going for the kind of acting you would see in those type of movies from the 50s.
I've seen a couple places where people compare Barry Bostwick's delivery as Brad to Adam West's delivery as Batman.
Yeah. You immediately think of, It's All Right, Jan.
Yeah.
Where it's so clear what's going on
Yeah,
there.
like, all right, Janet, it, like, echoes Adam West saying, precisely, Robin.
Yeah. And it's like how you can't see that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like how... But I think it's also the fact that there's also... It's kind of... Because it's really Brad and Janet that are kind of coming out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the whole point is that that doesn't quite mesh with the way Frankenfurter's portrayed, or Riff Raff, or all these
Mm-hmm.
characters that are like super over the top, and not only like from, you know, a different type of movie or something,
Mm-hmm.
but like they're literally from a different planet.
Well, even then, like, when you go into shock treatment, like, Cliff DeYoung and Jessica Harper don't play it that way.
Yeah, there is. I think Cliff DeYoung was kind of headed in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like it almost feels like that's the case where he was just getting like bad direction or something. Not to mention he's playing two characters,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also very funny to me that Cliff DeYoung is in The Hunger.
Mm-hmm.
You know who Cliff DeYoung plays in The Hunger?
No.
Susan Sarandon's boyfriend.
Oh.
Like how, and that was 2 years after shock treatment. So that's
I think Cliff DeYoung does great as Farley Flavors, but we'll get into that later.
yeah.
Plus, I love the little tidbit that Cliff DeYoung based Farley Flavors on Jack Nicholson.
Did he really?
Mm-hmm. That's in its IMDb trivia.
I'm starting to feel like that makes sense now that I think about it.
I mean, look at his appearance alone.
Yeah, the first thing that's catching my mind is the hair.
It's the hair, and he really tried to get down Jack's grin.
Yeah, I can see that now.
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like the way he smokes is coming into play with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's almost like a very over the top Jake Giddy's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like the way it's just sort of shown in general, even when it's like, because it's easy to forget the scenes that don't have songs, because a lot of the times the songs are in quick succession and usually come one
Mm-hmm.
right after the other. Like how I always forget that like I Can Make You a Man literally goes right into whatever happened to Saturday Night with like no in between.
Mm-hmm.
The only line in between is Columbia screaming Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just one song right after the other. And like the whole lab sequence
Mm-hmm.
is just like almost nonstop. But at the start of it, like when they first go up in the elevator,
Mm-hmm.
the lab is like really like cold and intimidating and quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And then like you almost forget, you get so swept up in it, you don't realize how long they're in the lab this first time.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from them arriving in the elevator right after Sweet Transvestite, and that goes...
Which, by the way, the only distance in time between Time Warp and Sweet Transvestite is literally Frank coming down.
Yeah, and you guys know how to Madison.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, and it starts with that, and then goes all the way to Frank and Rocky consummating? Is that what you would say? And that's a long thing. There's like, what, 4 songs in there?
Mm-hmm.
And it's...
That's where we spend a bulk of our time. Because they keep coming back to the lab.
Yeah, I've always wondered why.
Touch Me happens in the lab later.
Because I've always wondered, like, when Janet's, like, feeling guilty after what happened with Frank, it's like, for some reason, she goes to the lab. Because, like, because it's, you know, it could be to see, you know, like, what's going on with Brad, but it's like, it seems to occur to her in the moment, oh, I can find out here what's going on with it. And then it's revealed what has happened. Which another thing, people are wondering where the comedy of it is. That scene's hilarious.
Are you talking about when she flips on the screen and she's so distraught and Barry Bostwick's just sitting there chilling, smoking a cigarette?
That, just the whole interaction between, not just Brad and Frank, but the fact that it's Frank and Janet, and then the Brad and Frank scene has the exact same dialogue. With just slight alterations to fit the character. There's a lot of funny shit in and stuff that's like super obvious over the top comedy, like when what's the order? Janet, Dr. Scott, Janet, Brad, Rocky, and then Rocky just looks, and that happens 3 times over.
Let's not forget Dr. Scott's in that room because he crashed through the wall. After apparently doing circles in the Zen room and avoiding everything in Columbia and Magenta's room, but that wall was just too much of an obstacle to overcome.
And Magenta and Columbia have no reaction to
he can even do the stairs.
Yeah. And it does always drive me crazy. You can literally see what he's being pulled by. But it's like, it takes away the magnet effect. But still.
But, I mean, wouldn't that happen in a B movie?
Yeah.
A 50s B movie?
It's like seeing the strings on bats. Or flying saucers. But there's also things that I always thought interesting where it's like, there's things that feel like they don't have a whole lot of explanation going on. Like Eddie's involvement in this whole thing. And how apparently it was... He started off with Columbia, and then it was Eddie, and then it was Rocky. But it's like, how Eddie got it... We get some of this through song, but it still feels like this really vague story. How, like... Isn't it like Eddie only has half of his brain because the other half is in Rocky? Or something like that?
I believe so. It's very strange. It's a movie that the songs explain more of the story than the movie itself does.
Yeah. And that's the thing where it's like, that's the thing I was going into. I got sidetracked was, sometimes I forget how much are just like normal scenes of dialogue because the music is such, you know, kind of the life of the movie.
Which Shock Treatment's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
Shock Treatment's more like a traditional musical that way. Like, Rocky Horror tells its stories through the songs, and Shock Treatment, the songs are there to almost give you a break from the story.
Yeah, as I say, it's almost funny to think about Shock Treatment being closer to a traditional musical since Shock Treatment is insane in its own right.
And we'll get to it, but the music in Shock Treatment's good. It's not Rocky Horror good, but it's good.
Yeah. Like, I will say straight up, I've only seen Shock Treatment like 2 or 3 times, and I couldn't tell you many of the, outside of like a chorus, I couldn't tell you really any of the lyrics. Whereas we know Rocky Horror by heart at this point.
But I mean, you're looking at 15, 16 viewings versus 3.
Oh, 15, 16 seems way low. Maybe that's me, but... Because like I was saying, whenever I watch it, I usually watch it like multiple times in that time frame. And I don't know what that's added up to at this point. I feel like the only song I don't completely know all the lyrics to is The Sword of Damocles. Everything else I feel like I have. I don't know what it is about that song. Like, I mean, I've definitely got portions of it, but if I was to like be asked to lay out all the lyrics right now, I don't know that I could get all of them.
It's weird because I Can Make You a Man starts, then we have Hot Patootie, and then we have The Sword of Damocles. No, I'm backwards.
Yeah, Sword of Damocles is first.
And then we come back to I Can Make You a Man.
Yeah.
Like, we have a song start, two more songs, and then the first song ends. It's very haphazard.
Should we...
Like, literally, the song starts triumphantly, and then we go into Rocky pretty much being freaked out by everything. A song that ends in a murder, and then the first song that started happy ends triumphantly.
You know another thing I only noticed recently? Is talking about the fact that Frank is actually insane and is the villain of the movie. Does it make you wonder what about Frank's character we haven't seen and that we never really learn about in its entirety? Have you noticed when Frank appears at the end of whatever happened to Saturday Night, before he's even revealed he's got an ice pick in his hands, Eddie's already screaming and running from him. And it's like, what? I mean, obviously it's clear some haphazard procedure has happened. But he is terrified of Frank before he even realizes he's about to be murdered by him. Which is wild.
Which I still don't understand. And there's still a lot of things that aren't explained to this day. Like, Eddie was on the motorcycle. Why didn't he just leave?
What was he was he put in the freezer after the procedure, I guess? And it's just a 50s sci-fi kind of thing that he was just living in there, apparently. And could break out at any time, apparently. And that's the kind of thing where I feel like when you take that 50s approach, where a lot of movies were like this, especially like low-budget ones, where shit just happened, and you just ran with it. And it's like he really kind of embraced that.
I just figured it out. He didn't leave the lab because the only entrance and exit's the elevator, I think. I don't think there's until Dr. Scott created one. That was later.
And then everybody uses that hole.
Yeah, like the elevator is barely used after that.
Well, Brad has the decency to use it during
Janet uses it too.
Yeah, I was thinking like post hole being made. Because he and Dr. Scott use it. Because I love that. I always wondered why he pushes the button like that, and then it took me forever to realize he's not wearing his glasses. It's like so little details are still in there. Like there's still some sort of like logic or something going on. But clearly that's not the important thing. Because that's the thing also is it's like there are so many cases where there will be people that know like every single word to a musical, like every single song, and I'll always wonder like how is that even possible? And then I remember like me and Rocky Horror, me and The Wizard of Oz, and it's like oh that's how. I think albums help this as well. When people don't even like watch the movies because obviously we had like there were like different kinds of albums released in particular. There was like the punk one, and they had like all the covers. So it's like there's so many. There's even variations of the songs between the editions of the DVDs and the VHS. It's like the chorus of "Where the Frankenstein Place" is different. Like it has a different sound to it, and then Rocky and Janet's solos and Rose Tints My World have a different sound to them in like the special edition DVD. And it's still like I watched the VHS so many times. Still to this day, the way they sound in the special edition is jarring when I first hear it.
And this is a movie, like, a lot of people, like, memorize certain lines from movies. Like, the musicals you mentioned, like, Wizard of Oz, for example, people memorize the songs, or the songs become popular. In this movie, you've got people that know the songs, the dialogue, and the audience interaction you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like, this movie, like, is... The movie is an experience.
Yeah.
Like, start to finish. And I watched a play of it locally. It's like, even if you go to, like, community theater, it's a really fun thing to see people do live.
I still haven't gone down that road yet. Because I said just like general crowded places and crowded loud places are something that gives me like extreme anxiety, so I don't know.
But as a movie person, I would imagine watching Rocky Horror at midnight on Halloween has to be on your bucket list of things you want to experience in the theater.
It's one of those things you have to do it like at least one time.
There's been a couple times that I've almost done it and I backed out because honestly it was just because like I was afraid that I wouldn't fit in. It's not because, you know, how the people are. It's how much they love the movie. Like when you go, you want to make sure like you don't want to be the one that's the odd man out. You don't want to be Brad clapping at the beginning of Shock Treatment. Which Brad Jones brings up a good point. How has he got rhythm and movement in Rocky Horror, and then there he's a complete buffoon with it? I don't know.
And there is also, and apparently Ralph Halfchat was he always insane, or is he just insane in Shock Treatment, or what?
Yeah, like when did this heel turn occur?
Because even like Betty is not on the same side as him by the end of Shock Treatment.
No, they spend the whole movie fighting.
And then it's maybe
she's running around with Charles Gray.
I was saying maybe that's like some satirical take on like marriage or something.
I kind of feel like for Shock Treatment, like we're kind of jumping back and forth, but I kind of feel like with Shock Treatment, like I feel like Charles Gray and Betty Hapschatt are kind of supposed to be like the surrogate for the audience.
Yeah, I've also noticed, well, not really noticed because it's right there, but it's like, is there any debate as to whether or not Charles Gray might be the same character? Because
he's not.
One's a criminologist and one's a judge. They both deal in crime.
They're not supposed to be. They have different names. Well, the judge has a name.
I was going to say, does the criminologist even have a name?
No. No. But,
well, I was going to add on to what you said about the theater experience, where it's like, it's that case where you're super, super passionate about something, and when you feel passionate about something, you're always afraid that you're going to end up in a room with other people and feel like you don't have passion at all compared to other people.
Yeah, exactly. like that would be the case for a lot of people, like, and I can't believe I missed when this happened, and I hope it happens again, but it would be like me going to see, like, the 89 Batman in the theater, or the Big Lebowski in the theater. We watched the Fathom of Big Lebowski, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Completely packed, many people in costume, as far as I remember.
People laughing at the things you laugh at. Like, it was... I really enjoyed watching Big Lebowski theatrically.
And it was the really mundane stuff that, like, you think you're the only one that finds it funny, and then a whole room laughs with you, and it's this whole... It's like a community.
It is. Like, I mean, the Big Lebowski spawned a convention that Jeff Bridges goes out of his way to attend.
Yeah.
Which, I did see Jeff Bridges in remission. That's awesome.
Yes.
Let's hope he keeps getting better.
There was that one story. I never feel like I got the full story of it exactly, but there was that one story where, like, Tim Curry had to be taken out of a Rocky Horror screening because people were distracted or something. It was something I never got.
I know for a long time Tim Curry had animosity towards Rocky Horror. I think he's made his peace with it now.
Yeah.
But there was a long time where I don't know if he felt that like it like kept him in a box, like with what people thought, which Tim Curry's done so many things since then. I mean, you couldn't keep Tim Curry in a box. To me, Tim Curry is British Christopher Walken. Like,
well, the thing,
like if you need the right amount of insane with great deliveries, but you get Christopher Walken. If you need him to be British, you call Tim Curry.
I think the thing that makes his performance as Frank so incredible to me is that I'm so incredibly aware of the fact that Tim Curry is Frank. But when I see Tim Curry in other movies, I don't see Frank at all. Frank is like his own separate entity that lives separately from Tim Curry. But it's such a well-known fact that it's him, yet somehow, and no matter how many times I see it, that's always been, like, it's still to this day the case. And it's like, Pennywise is kind of the same way, but he's also buried in makeup. Whereas Frank he's still technically buried in makeup, but it's still him. But it's like, it almost doesn't even occur to me that, you know, the concierge from Home Alone 2 or Wadsworth or whoever is Frank.
Loaded weapon.
The Girl Scout uniform.
Nigel Thornberry.
Yeah. And it's one of those performances that, like, he never wastes a single second of screen time. Like, I can't even think of a fraction of a second where he's just not completely on when he's Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Even when Frank's depressed, it's still so dramatic.
Mm-hmm. And even when he's being salty, like when they're singing "Happy Birthday" to Rocky, and he just stops in the middle of it.
I love all the
He's just like, yeah, enough of that.
I love all the threats with the electric knife too. And it's like that's got to be one of the all-time like at least performances in a musical.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, you always talk about an actor that just really became a character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing where we talked about. I talked about this before with Steve Martin in Little Shop of Horrors,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like the part has been around forever, but more often than not, when you see somebody else do the musical, they're basically just doing Steve Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you see performances of Frankenfurter, it's like it's got to be really difficult to not just kind of be Tim Curry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and it's usually you'll find like some of the best and also some of the worst Tim Curry impressions when you see various Frankenfurters throughout.
It's like you bring up too, like the little moments where he doesn't waste a second of screen time, like the song Eddie that they're singing at the dinner table. Like Frank doesn't, I don't think he contributes a word, but the entire time he has that cat that ate the canary look on his face. He knows something nobody else does.
He gets what a guy,
Mm-hmm.
but even then there's something so knowing about it.
Yeah, and then like as the song's ending and he stands up and gives that look that he's like, I'm about to shit on this party.
Yeah.
And I can't wait.
I've always wondered, did Riff Raff shush Magenta in that moment because he knew what was coming, or to just end the song?
That's the thing. It could go either way.
Because I love that whole thing that's going on that has like no dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
where it can almost seem like it comes from out of nowhere when Riff Raff and Magenta show up at the end,
Mm-hmm.
but like they're silently plotting his downfall the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Like their resentment is clear the whole time, especially Riff Raff's. It's
Yeah.
always confused me when Magenta was like surprised at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought you liked them. I thought you were fully involved in this, Magenta. What are you flip-flopping for? It's no wonder he shrieked at her. And almost, Dr. Scott almost got himself plugged in that moment.
Yeah.
Just for agreeing with it. But I love that. I love the idea that Riff Raff just went totally unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he became unpredictable in those moments.
Mm-hmm. And then he succeeds.
Yeah. And that's, and I don't know what's going on with Richard O'Brien and Patricia Quinn, but it's like, it's interesting between this and Shock Treatment that the whole brother and sister incest thing was a common theme with their characters. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm sure that's just a callback. But it's like, I also wonder if it's like, they've got both of them have a freaky fetish and they found each other. But it's, I was trying to figure out what else, because in fact there's so much to say about Rocky Horror.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, is there any... We talked about the Sword of Damocles being the one song that I don't think I know all the words to. Do you have a song that you feel like might be a weak link? Because one of the things that makes Rocky Horror so great is that there isn't a song singled out as a bad song.
Mm-hmm.
But is there one that's, like, the weakest?
I think the answer to that would have to be Superheroes, and they realize that because it's cut through from most versions.
And what's interesting is I don't even mind Superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it's jarring when you know it's there because you can see how obvious the cut is when it goes from the house rising to them laying there.
Mm-hmm.
That you can tell there was something there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we've talked about the songs in general, like to praise just individual songs. We just heard Time Warp earlier today,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like these songs never like. Obviously, there's a lot of great songs just in general that never get old.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, think about the number of times we've heard the songs in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
and how I don't know, like Science Fiction Double Feature and Time Warp, and probably a few others are ones that I feel like I could listen to on a loop, probably all day,
Mm-hmm.
and they just wouldn't get old. Time Warp, and like I said, especially when you hear all the different words. Have you heard Tenacious D's Time Warp?
No, I haven't.
you know how committed Jack Black is as a musician. Imagine him committing to Time Warp. It's pretty amazing.
I feel like I hope they never do. I mean, the live version pretty much killed any chance of that. But do you feel like there is a 99.9% chance if they ever did another version of Rocky Horror, Jack Black is Eddie?
I see no reason not, especially since Meatloaf played his dad in Tenacious D. It just makes perfect sense. And that's the thing is, like, Eddie's such a crucial character. I always forget whatever happened to Saturday Night is literally his whole screen time. That's it.
But he's a catalyst for so much that happens.
Yeah. I say, unless you count the very grotesque corpse. Like, it's clearly fake, but it's pretty fucking disgusting, too. I guess another thing I wanted to bring up was the idea of the floor show. Because like I was talking about, where it's like, it's so interesting how positive of a figure Frank is, particularly for the whole "don't dream it, be it" phrase. I saw an amazing shirt once where it was the cover of it was "Don't Dream It," and it was Frankenfurter, and on the back it was "Be It," and it was Pennywise. And I was like, that's one of the most amazing shirts I've ever seen. But I love the idea, because that's another thing that just kind of went by me. Because, like, especially when you're watching the movie as a kid, you're not really paying attention to what the criminologist is saying. But the criminologist builds this up.
The criminologist is probably responsible for the other... The songs tell part of the story, the criminologist essentially tells the rest.
Yeah. And the fact that this is in, like, crime history. But no, the idea of...
It has a case name.
Yeah. But the idea of him building up the floor show as something really sinister and unpredictable. And it's when you look at it from that sense, it's like the floor show is so lively. And it's like the big climatic moment of the movie. The floor show is an insane person living out a fantasy in an empty room. Which is pretty creepy.
With people that he's trapped there.
Yeah. And it's like, like I said, you get so caught up in it. The floor show feels like this amazingly upbeat thing. And you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. This is a mad scientist. This is a mad killer scientist.
But then the floor show ends, and Frank sings a song, and the way that Tim Curry acts it, you actually start to feel sorry for Frank.
It makes him a tragic figure.
Yeah.
And it's like you keep forgetting how it's like, but like even that is like playing into his delusion when he imagines a whole crowd cheering for him. And then Riff Raff just shuts that shit down immediately.
It's like, Magenta.
Yeah.
Because she comes in and says, how sentimental.
And then he says, how very presumptuous of you.
See? We know the lines. Matthew Glave is, okay, we all know the words.
Even Riff Raff even says, I'm sorry if you found my words misleading, but you see, I'm going to fucking kill you. Obviously not the line. It's, you have to remain here in spirit anyway. I love the wording on that, by the way. And then say goodbye to all of this and hello to oblivion. He was really building up Frank's death for him.
And you even have this point that, like, Brad kind of sticks up for him. He's like, what's he done? And it's funny that he sticks up for him because Brad's listening to Nixon in the car for fun. Like, I mean, the dude is conservative, but yet he's the only one that came to Frank's defense. And at that point, it's like, do you wonder, like, is Brad becoming more open? Is it some Stockholm Syndrome going on? Is it because they fucked?
I was going to say, that was a brilliant blowjob.
Yeah. Is it that? Like...
But yeah, even, like... Because he and Janet are at odds for most of the movie, her and Frank. Of that moment where he even, like, is very passé about passing her statue when the floor show
sticks his tongue out on her.
Yeah, that's it.
He turns 5 for a second.
And then he kind of brushes away Dr. Scott being there. It's like he knew some of these people weren't part of the plan.
Yeah.
Also, talking about how dark the ending goes, I don't know if it's because it's so abrupt or what, but for some reason, no matter how many times I see the movie, I always forget that Columbia dies. It's like that kind of builds up. Like, it's the moment Frank realizes he, like, really comes to terms with the fact, oh shit, I'm about to die.
Yeah, because she was one of them.
Yeah.
Like, her and Magenta shared a room, they were obviously friends, and they just waste her like nothing.
Yeah. That's the thing. Riff Raff just completely comes unglued.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like been his plan the whole time. Like, it was very well thought out, as reckless as it seems. And as sudden as it seems. Even his hunch disappears. What's up with that?
And he learns how to style his hair.
Yeah, and I love how, like, as if the callbacks to old monster movies isn't enough, they literally do The Bride of Frankenstein for Magenta. It's like, if you don't get the point by now, which apparently a lot of critics didn't at the time, it's like, this is what we're doing.
It's like Richard O'Brien couldn't have laid out any clear landing lights.
Yeah.
Like, this is where we're going.
Do you feel like it's interesting foreshadowing? First off, we were talking about The Wizard of Oz, and how that whole concept of seeing the people as normal people, and then when you get into the fantastical stuff, it's the same actors in the fantastical parts. The fact it was an embarrassing long time before I noticed Tim Curry, Richard O'Brien, and Patricia Quinn in the back, and little one else there also at the church at the beginning. And it's like, do you think it's some sort of ominous foreshadowing when it's like they clear out the Habshat wedding and it's being turned into a funeral? It's like it's foreshadowing for the, I guess not just the doom of their marriage, but if you look at Shock Treatment, the Habshat marriage as well. We actually just, Jeremy Newsom, I think his name is, who plays Ralph Habshat, we just lost him last year. I think it was motor neuron disease. So that's unfortunate.
We almost lost Tim Curry.
Yeah. I love that he did like a fan expo a few years ago, around the time the first It was coming out, I think. And it's like, it's clear the state that he's in, but like his wit is still completely intact.
I do love the touch too that the live version, as hated as it was, I do love the touch that he was the criminologist.
Yeah, that's another thing that shows just how much he came around, it seemed. It's like, that's the kind of thing, though. It's like, being a part of this, how can you not embrace it?
Well, ask Tim Curry.
I'm not even sure how long that lasted.
It took, I want to say it was like 30 years.
Yeah, because I don't know how much I've heard him talk about it. Like pre relatively recent stuff. Or whatever you consider recent. But. So, is that pretty much what Rocky Horror is?
I think so.
We were saying before this, it's kind of I feel like it's a hard movie to kind of discuss because so much is already established, like its impact that it's had.
It's one of those movies that there's nothing really new you can say about it that hasn't already been said.
Yeah, talking about the cult status and the midnight showings and stuff like that, but audience participation.
The fact that it's the longest running theatrical movie in history.
And it's like with stuff like Lebowski, I feel like there's a large number of people that say I just still can't get into it. Like, everybody talks about it, but I can't get into it. There are definitely people that say they have never gotten into Rocky Horror and they don't get it. Sometimes some people just hate the movie. But I feel like there's a lot less of those people. Like, I feel like Rocky Horror has wins over people more easily somehow. The songs being so good has to play a big part in that. Because you could just
which is so crazy, because there's a lot of people that are turned off by like people that are obnoxious about something, and a lot of people consider the Rocky Horror crowd to be obnoxious because they're so passionate about it.
I'm curious about the existence of people that don't like the movie itself but love the music. Like people that would love the album by itself. But for whatever one reason or another, they wouldn't care for the movie. Given that, that's...
I think a lot of that probably just falls down to the point that people don't understand the point of the movie.
Yeah. I could see that being the case. I was trying to remember. I remember the first time I watched it. Because you had watched it with the neighbor's kids. And their dad eventually got in trouble for that. Ours were pretty lenient on that. I always talk about the VHS shelf that our parents had, and it was like, Coppola's Dracula.
I've already had the discussion with the little one. When do we introduce Rocky Horror? Because I think as she gets older, like, I want her to see it because I think it will help her a lot with acceptance of people that are different than her.
Yeah.
But, I mean, when do you work that in? Like, if you show it too early, I mean, you could really warp something. If you show it too late, you might not appreciate it.
I say I can't stress enough how kind of amazing it is, how positive an influence Frank has had as a symbol, despite being a killer mad scientist.
Yeah.
That is completely insane. Like, it seems like it would be contradicting, but the fact that people saw what O'Brien was doing, and the
fact that, like you said, his death becomes tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the way that Rocky handles it helps with that.
The fact that we're talking, like, classic monster movies, we literally get a King Kong moment. Like, Rocky goes down exactly like King Kong.
Yeah.
Which, King Kong was a giant monster full of destruction, but his death was always tragic.
You could even tie it into the whole Frankenstein motif.
I am piecing...
Like, the RKO radio tower is his windmill.
I'd like to say we've thought this. I'm coming to these discoveries in real time.
The King Kong one or the Frankenstein one?
Both.
I've always gotten King Kong vibes from that scene. Especially when Rocky turns around and just...
But it only just kind of set in the fact that King Kong's death is also tragic despite him being a monster. So it's... And it was beauty killed the beast. Would you say it's Rocky's own beauty? Because that's his whole purpose. So, yeah. So not that I'm into, like, muscle dudes or anything, but I mean, just like, that's Rocky's symbolic point.
And it seems like Rocky is what sends Riff Raff over the edge.
Yeah, like it was the final nail.
Like, once Rocky comes alive, we really start to see that resentment come out.
So that in itself feels like... I love the score when he's taunting Rocky with the candles. It's so... It feels like it's out of, like, one of the Hammer Dracula movies. It's like there's so much of those classic monster movies you get. It's like you can dissect it all day and find all the different things that have that feel or a direct reference. And it's like you can tell just sort of the... This movie is a love letter to so many different things that have nothing in common. But at the same time, maybe they do, because of the monster tragedy thing.
I think the other thing, too, with the movie is once you get to the mansion, take the Transylvanians out of it, every character that you meet is significant to the story.
Yeah. That's another thing, too, is it blends a little bit, because I was talking about that VHS shelf, where it was stuff like, you know, Coppola's Dracula, Fast Times, all these R-rated movies.
Born on 4th of July.
Yeah. And Rocky Horror was there. And for the longest time before we finally watched it, I had assumed it was some full-on horror movie, because the only picture on the back of the box is the gate with Enter at Your Own Risk on it. And the lettering looks like it's written in blood. And it does kind of have the feel... There are some moments that are creepy at the beginning, like... I was been kind of creeped out by the Transylvanians on the motorcycles. And the whole idea of they seem to come from nowhere. Because they reach the dead end, and it's a throwaway line where Janet says, well, where did those motorcycles come from? And then we realize they're at the mansion when they get there.
Yeah, and then when they all leave, it's where'd they go.
Yeah. It's like, there's something kind of creepy about that in a classic horror kind of way. When you're building up to, like, the sinister mansion that you see in, like, you know, the Hammer movies and stuff like that. So, yeah, has any ground not been touched yet?
I don't think so.
Alright, then do we kind of shift on over to shock treatment and see what people...
Fill in the holes that we've got started?
Well, obviously the main problem, as far as people hating it, was the fact that they were expecting Rocky Horror again. And, I mean, you can see Rocky Horror in it. But it's... I mean, if you go into that movie, not knowing anything about its existence prior, except that Richard O'Brien did it, and it was, hey, we did Rocky Horror, and now there's this thing. And it's the same heroes.
I believe, I could be mistaken, the comments section will correct me, I'm sure, but I believe one of the original concepts was Tim Curry was going to play Burt Schnick.
I think I heard something like that, and then there was something about like, had they done an actual direct sequel to Rocky Horror, it was like Brad would be doing a naked trapeze and then die, and it turns into like a revenge thing, and then it involves the son that Frank put into Janet that night. His name would be, I think his name was Sonny, and it's that I don't know all the details of that. It would have been really weird, the ideas they had for a direct. I don't know if it was supposed to be a show or a movie or what. But yeah, I think it was the whole idea of Brad having a twin was still the thing where it was like his twin brother was pissed off about the trapeze thing, and it was still. I love the fact that how outlandish it is that Brad has an evil twin, and how that was the one thing that apparently stuck that was going to be in the original idea. And it's like, oh no, that's the part we have to keep.
I love the idea that a lot of the movie had to be changed because the movie was originally supposed to take place all over town, but thanks to, I think it was some kind of strike that was going on.
I think it was SAG, probably.
Yeah, that they couldn't film outdoors, which I don't know how the two things are related, but okay. But the fact that
strikes are weird.
like, isn't there another one getting ready to happen?
Yeah.
But like the fact that they pretty much took this idea and put it all in a studio and like completely changed the concept.
And it's a creepy concept. The fact that the whole town is trapped in here, essentially. And it's like basically them being trapped in, basically the concept of them being trapped inside a TV. Not as literal as that, but that's
not like Stay Tuned, but
yeah.
like it's weird. It's kind of like it's kind of like what Frank wanted for his floor show.
Yeah. Yeah, with the audience just obeying and all that. Because obviously at the time, it was just a satire on TV in general, and then reality TV happened. And then it was like, oh shit, this movie was a profit.
Yeah.
And it's and apparently that was for like, I guess Richard O'Brien hated this movie for a while, but then it was when the reality TV stuff started breaking out is when he realized, oh, I was onto something. So
I do think the movie is inferior to Rocky Horror, but I also feel like comparing it to Rocky Horror has made it become underappreciated.
Yeah.
Because the stuff that's good in it is good.
Because that's the thing though, is it's interesting how it kind of comes full circle, because I said, I wasn't thinking about this when I said this, how cult movies can only be made by accident. And it's like the fact that he did intentionally make a cult movie, but the reason it has the impact it has now was an accident. So it still happened that way.
Yeah. And like you said, there are elements in it. Like, would it shock anybody if Richard O'Brien came out and said, yeah, Bert Schnick was from Transylvania? Would that shock anybody?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is no. It would not shock anybody. It's like, yes, he does absolutely give that vibe.
And the fact that of his deception, like, he fakes being blind. Like, there's no... The only payoff to it, I guess you could call it, is that he tries to take a peek at Janet in the shower. But, like, him faking his blindness has no bearing whatsoever.
Yeah. It's literally just, like, around... Like, you just can't trust anything. The whole place is sinister. I do love the idea that the show is called Marriage Maze. And Richard O'Brien actually did go on to host a game show called The Crystal Maze. That I think is still going on. He only did it in like the early 90s. Now it was, I think Stephen Merchant did it for a year, and then Richard Iowati's been doing it since. But it's a game show about a maze. I think you do like different challenges throughout the maze and all that. And I've seen clips of it, and they're really fun.
And I think also the fact that, like you said, everybody just goes along with everything. Like Janet's parents.
Yeah.
Like they just go, like they have no... It's not weird to them that Brad is sitting in a bird cage, just being fed pills. Like, that's not weird to them.
And it's always been so interesting to me talking about that whole idea of how audiences just kind of follow anything. Now you see, if you watch any kind of daytime TV show now, it's like you just hear clapping at like every sentence. And it's like it's this weird sort of, it's almost like watching a cult or something. And it's so interesting how people saw this movie back in 81 and they were like, yeah, it's satire on TV, we get it. But like now you watch it and it's done the whole reality TV thing before reality TV was a thing. And if you were to watch it just with the idea of, oh, it's a take on reality TV, you'd be like, man, this is really on the nose. When it wasn't even a thing.
It wouldn't be for a decade or more.
And I can literally see people watching Shock Treatment today not knowing that and going, man, why are they being so obvious with the satire? Because there's that whole thing where it's like, the whole reality TV manipulation, where it's like it plays itself up as something real, but like they're behind the scenes, you know, talking to Janet about Brad and like saying you have to be more like this, and like it's manufactured drama at the expense of her like actual feelings and her actual well-being. But it's also its portrayal of brainwashing, where they're constantly saying, what is it they keep saying about Brad? That he's, I think I wrote it down actually, an emotional cripple. The line, Brad is an emotional cripple, is repeated constantly to Janet until she's just saying it herself. And it's like, that's actually like the perfect representation of brainwashing. In the way that's, in the fact that this, like we talked about the horror element of Rocky Horror and how it was kind of in there. This movie does have, and I don't even know how much this has to do with how relevant it is now. But there's a lot of things that are genuinely scary about Shock Treatment's whole concept. And the fact that people can just be that easily manipulated, specifically by media.
I mean, look how the movie ends.
Yeah. I love how dark the ending is. Like, they still, like, our heroes still go off, but it's still, like, dark-ass ending.
Farley still wins.
Yeah. I do have,
And it's not like he has to do anything last minute. It's just his scheme is so rock solid, it just comes through for him.
Yeah. I do think they, there are some things from, like, a filmmaking perspective where the movie doesn't really hold up. Like, it's really, like, when you see this stuff it was doing that made it ahead of its time, which is quite a bit of the movie, is what makes you really realize how much of an impact it can still have. But, like, from a filmmaking standpoint, I can see where it's kind of like... And that's another case where it's like... I mean, I don't know how much you can say about the filmmaking of Rocky Horror, but, like, how well they accomplish, you know, just the love letter to, like, 50s monster movies and stuff like that. But there's just some, you know, petty stuff that I think about, like the fact that, literally the opening shot of the movie is Farley shrouded in shadows. And it's like he's going to be this big mythical figure. He's only shrouded in shadows for like the first 10 minutes. And he's just unceremoniously revealed.
It's like Rupert Everett, Inspector Gadget, where he's in the shadows, then they just reveal him and then put him back in the shadows. But I think also you have to look at Rocky Horror was an adaptation from the stage show. And Shock Treatment was a completely original idea for film.
Yeah, well, I was trying to remember if it was or not.
I don't even think there's been like stage productions of Shock Treatment or anything. I don't think it's gotten big enough to do that.
Yeah, that's what we were saying, how it's still, like, it actually is, like, it still has cult status because it's still a movie that feels essentially off the radar, particularly when you're comparing it to Rocky Horror, for sure. But there's still, like, so many people like me who don't know it near as well as we know Rocky Horror.
I've seen a lot of people say that it's easier to get an appreciation for Shock Treatment if you don't treat it as a sequel and treat it as a spin-off.
Yeah. Because there is still the case where you can argue, like, Janet in particular has, like, the same arc, where she goes from, like, square to sexy and stuff like that. But under the whole reality TV kind of thing. Where it's basically for the whole 15 minutes of fame thing. But at the same time of how people behind the scenes are pressured into doing what they do on screen. And they're so empty otherwise, but despite the fact being beloved by people, even though it's like this same group of people that keeps following her around, it still gives you the impression that she's beloved.
And it's a small group of people that's just super passionate.
Yeah. And the fact that the crowd sleeps there. It's like, not only does that give you the vibe of just the whole town feeling trapped in there, but the idea that people consume media, and then they sleep, and then they just immediately wake up and consume more media. Just immediately. And you can, like, that can almost translate to, like, phones nowadays as well. Like, you could really just take it all the way down the rabbit hole. you can take it somewhere. But I don't want to sound like some, old man complaining about phones, but that comes to mind. So there's that. But it's basically the equivalent to back in the old days when parents would say TV will rot your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's how that just graduates through time to other things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, how even movies like Shock Treatment in 81 can somehow predict what those things are going to be.
Well, I mean, also, not counting this current moment, how often do you go into, I know you don't go to many people's houses, but how often have you gone into someone's house and the TV is on? Or while you're there, the TV is on?
Yeah, usually.
And it usually comes up in conversation somewhere. Like, I remember going to see Grandma and Granddad Davis. The TV was always on. Nobody was really watching it, but if something happened, usually someone caught it and it would be discussed. Like, the TV was always ready with, something to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah, and most of the time it was practically muted.
Mm-hmm. But it's still there and it's still running. And, when there's a break in conversation, your eyes might float there. Look at the situation here. Like Back to the Future. In the 50s, they make fun of Marty. They're like, no one has two TVs. I don't make a ton of money, but there's 4 TVs in this house. 5 if you count the broken one. It's so... the only rooms in my house that don't have a TV are the bathroom. That's it. The bathroom and the kitchen.
I feel like I've actually felt for quite some time it's only a matter of time before TVs and bathrooms became a thing. But then phones happened.
They still are, though. There's people that do have flat screens in their bathroom. And no longer than you're in there. People cannot bring themselves away from media long enough.
I seem to recall...
Especially when it's something that they, if it's telling them something they want to hear.
Yeah. I seem to recall, I want to say, I could be wrong, I want to say it's Parasite has a scene of somebody watching TV while they're, in the bath.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Jennifer Tilly tried that in Bride of Chucky, and we saw what happened, but they're kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
The placement's different.
Your reference stuck with the Halloween motif.
Yeah.
But, Shock Treatment does explore a lot of things that weren't really relevant for its time, but are now. I would say Shock Treatment is more relevant now than it was in 1981.
Well, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like we were talking about, even when you see the progression of what media, the formats you see media in, or even, you could harken back to what Shock Treatment was saying about just in general TV at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's, really specific.
Especially the way, TV blends, how Janet and Brad start on what appears to be a game show, Marriage Maze, and it ends with them, living on the set, and we've transitioned to a new show. You could take, a show that I've been watching the past couple years, Big Brother, is essentially a game show. There's money to be won at the end, but these people live together in this house for 3 months.
And the cameras are everywhere.
Yeah, it's a game show, but there's a personal level to it.
And I think it's also even mentioned in Shock Treatment, isn't it, that whenever Janet goes somewhere, the cameras just follow her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's really interesting how Shock Treatment is so prophetic.
Shock Treatment kind of feels like a precursor to the Truman Show.
Yeah, you could say that. Or Stay Tuned, or any of that stuff. It's like Shock Treatment was the first to explore... I'm sure it wasn't the first. The comment section, be kind. But it's the first example I can think of where the idea of TV is part of the villainy.
Yeah. Well, it's like what you were talking about with the TV just being there.
Mm-hmm.
And even on mute and then starting discussion where it's the TV is basically another person.
Mm-hmm.
And how kind of weird that is when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think
you even treat it like a member of conversation. If you want to hear what it says, everybody shuts up and you turn it up. If they're not needed to be part of the conversation, you mute it. but it's still there.
Yeah.
Waiting for you to have a break in the conversation so it can throw something at you to talk about.
I just remember there's one more thing we haven't mentioned. I love that Rick Mayall is in this movie. Because, I remember as soon as I saw him in it, the first time I saw it, it was like, he's one of those people that just feels like he belongs in this cast. When you think of all the people that carried over from Rocky Horror, it's like, I could see him in Rocky Horror as well. And so I love that he's just kind of there as another character, but just his presence is like, yeah, he belongs here.
What do you think of the performances of Shock Treatment? Like, we brought up at the beginning of the video, I think Cliff DeYoung is great as Farley Flavors.
Yeah, it is hard to say because it does go back to what we were talking about with Rocky Horror, where the performances are very intentional in the way they are. Jessica Alba does have some great moments. There are also moments where she can seem like kind of out of place, but then there's other times where she's like amazing. Which I feel like kind of is just her in general. I feel like I remember feeling that way about her performance in Suspiria also. So
I don't think I've ever seen her in anything else.
You've seen Suspiria, haven't you? I feel like we watched it once.
If we did, I don't remember it. I'm assuming you mean the original.
Yes. She might be in the new one as well, but I don't remember for sure.
The only, Cliff DeYoung's been in a couple other things I think I've seen.
Yeah. And usually kind of like nothing rolls. So it was interesting to kind of see him here where he kind of has to be because Brad is the kind of guy that just blends into a crowd. It's like your generic square type character like we were talking about.
Which Barry Bostwick was the same way.
Yeah, Barry
Bostwick was a little more confident in it.
Yeah, Barry Bostwick was pretty much perfect in all regards. Like even when you see him as Brad, and then when you see him during the floor show, like it's kind of incredible. It's the same person. And then when you would see Barry Bostwick later in his career, still to think that was the guy that was in the floor show. It's like.
Do you feel like that Barry Bostwick and Ted Danson have aged the same way?
Probably. That's So, is that pretty much? I mean, I guess that's one problem you can have about Shock Treatment is we talk about it as far as like its status today. That is pretty much all you can say because the songs don't really stand out to me. Like the opening song and the title song. And I feel like it's kind of even a cliche to say that those are the two songs that stand out. But I mean,
yeah, and like I said, I think the music's good, not great. Like you said, you're not gonna remember it, but when you're watching it, it's like this is all right.
Yeah, there is also the song where I can't remember like the full gist of it, but at some point it's just Janet saying "me" over and over again, and the whole idea of how this type of fame and that reality TV fame obviously goes to people's heads, and these people that have no talent or really any reason for existing think they are the height of the universe.
Kardashian.
You could have just flat out said that and not been controversial at all.
Fine. Kardashian.
Chrissy Teigen comes to mind as well.
She's at least got John Legend.
All right, so is that pretty much it? I guess we don't need to say if we prefer one over the other. I think that's pretty clear. I think that's going to be pretty clear to most people, like if you ask pretty much anybody. I'm sure there's the odd person out there that...
I know you watched Shock Treatment a long time ago, and then you watched it this morning. Did anything, in your opinion, change from the first time you watched it? Like, did you enjoy it more this time? Was it more of a problem for you this time? Like... I don't think it had the LA Confidential arc for you. But...
Well, when I saw it the last time, it was on like IFC or the Sundance channel. It was in that area of channels. It was like at 2 in the morning or something. And I just remember it not really having much of an impact at all. Like I remember it being like kind of confusing, and I didn't really get what the point was.
Well, even Richard O'Brien said the plot was confusing.
Yeah. And I think it just didn't really stick with me at all. Like it was just like it was in my head. Everybody had built it up as it's like Rocky Horror but shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pretty much walked away going, it's pretty much what I expected as far as Rocky Horror but shit. And then I completely forgot about it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the only image I had in my head was Richard O'Brien and the Doctor get up.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest was vague.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, now obviously it resonates in a lot of different ways to where it's much more. Because even when the first time I saw the movie, reality TV wasn't near the thing that it is now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way where it was like. Plus, I was probably just too young in general to really get satire in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I would have only been like 10 the first time I saw Rocky Horror, which I don't know how many people find that questionable, but yeah. So I probably saw Shock Treatment maybe like a year or two later or something. And yeah. So is that where we stand on these?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So the next thing is going to be our bigger video, where I guess I can go ahead and say that. I may have already mentioned it once before. We're going to talk about the Mummy Trilogy. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how that goes. And then I keep saying, by the way, in the Mummy video that, yeah, I'm at the end. I'm finally done with everything. I got behind at some point, so I'm not done yet. But it's all going to kind of be coming in quick succession.
And to prelude into the Mummy Trilogy video, I am all for the Brendan Fraser Renaissance going on right now.
Yeah. So you'll hear more about that in the
Mm-hmm.
next video. So until that one, is that pretty much it?
Yeah.
All right.